The first sign of the storm was not the wind, but the silence. The birds stopped their chatter. The squirrels ceased their chittering, and the ancient pines seemed to hold their breath. Elias paused his work, a half-carved fox in his hands, and listened to the void. He knew what it meant. Setting the fox and his tools aside, he moved to the single window of his hut, wiping the condensation from the glass with his sleeve. The world outside was disappearing, swallowed by a wall of white. He had just begun stoking the fire when the pounding started. Not a polite knock, but a series of heavy, desperate thuds against his thick oak door. His heart clenched. Visitors were rare and never good, especially in a storm like this. He grabbed the heavy iron poker from the hearth, not as a weapon, but as a precaution. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice rough from disuse. "Travelers!" a woman's voice shouted back, strained against the howling wind. "Shelter!" "We ask for shelter." Elias hesitated. His solitude was his sanctuary, but to leave anyone outside in this was a death sentence. With a resigned sigh, he lifted the wooden bar and cracked the door open. The blast of cold air stole his breath. 3 figures stood huddled on his doorstep, cloaked in furs and caked in snow. The one in front, a woman with strands of fiery red hair escaping her hood and eyes the color of hardened amber, met his gaze without flinching. "We will freeze out here," she stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. She was the leader. He could feel it in her bearing. Behind her stood another younger woman, her face pale and eyes wide with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. She clutched a bow so tightly her knuckles were white. But it was the third who caught his attention. She stood slightly apart, her hood drawn low, but he could see the sharp line of her jaw and the quiet, assessing way she took in his hut, his person, the poker in his hand. She moved with a stillness that felt more dangerous than the other's obvious tension. "We have coin," the redhead, Anya said, pulling a leather pouch from her belt. "I don't need your coin," Elias grumbled. "I need my peace and quiet." "And we need our lives," Anya shot back. "A fair trade for one night." The wind screamed, shaking the very foundations of the hut. The silent one lifted her head slightly, and for a fleeting second, Elias met a pair of eyes the color of a forest twilight, deep and unreadable. Something in that look decided for him. "Get in," he relented, stepping back. "Wipe your feet." They filed in, bringing the storm's chill with them. They shed their snow-laden cloaks, revealing lean, muscular frames clad in practical leathers. Anya had a long knife at her hip. The young one, Rian, her bow, and the quiet one, Kaelin, he would learn, carried 2 short swords crossed on her back. A pack of huntresses, through and through. "You are Elias, the woodcarver?" Anya asked, her gaze sweeping over the shelves filled with his creations. Wolves, bears, and birds, frozen in wooden flight. "I am." "And you are?" "Anya." "This is Rian." She gestured to the younger woman, who offered a timid nod. "And Kaelin." The quiet one simply inclined her head, her twilight eyes still studying him. "What brings a pack like you into these mountains in deep winter?" he asked, handing out rough-spun blankets. "Hunting," Anya said, a little too quickly. "The wrong kind of game, I'd wager," Elias muttered, turning to hang their cloaks by the fire. He received no answer. For a while, the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the relentless moan of the wind. Elias prepared a simple stew, and they ate in silence, the warmth of the food easing the rigid set of their shoulders. Rian fell asleep almost immediately after, curled by the hearth. Anya maintained her watchful posture, but her eyes grew heavy. It was Kaelin who remained perfectly alert. She didn't stare, but Elias was acutely aware of her attention. It was like a physical touch, a gentle pressure on his skin. He found himself wondering what she was thinking behind those calm, impenetrable eyes. "The shed," he said suddenly, remembering his own neglected chores. "The storm might tear the roof off if it's not secured." "I'll be back." He pulled on his own heavy coat and stepped back out into the maelstrom, the cold a sharp slap after the hut's warmth. The wind tore at him as he fought his way to the small wood shed, checking the tarpaulin and hammering a loose board back into place. The work was quick, his fingers growing numb. As he turned to hurry back to the warmth, a flicker of something on his cabin door caught his eye. It wasn't a shadow. It was too deliberate. He moved closer, brushing away the accumulating snow. There, carved into the dark grain of the wood, was a symbol. It was fresh, the cuts clean and precise. It looked like a stylized wolf's head, intertwined with what might have been thorny vines or perhaps lightning. It was beautiful and fierce, and it had not been there an hour ago. A strange mix of unease and a peculiar thrill washed over him. This was no random vandalism. It was a message. A mark, but what did it mean? A warning to others? A claim of territory? His mind flashed to Kaylin, her quiet intensity, the way her eyes had held his. She had been the last inside. She had the skill for such fine, swift work. He stood there for a long moment in the blinding snow, his heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with the cold. The mark felt possessive, primal. It was a line drawn in the sand of his solitary life, and he had no idea which side of it he was standing on. Brushing the snow away one more time, he committed the symbol to memory and pushed the door open, stepping back into the heat and the light where 3 dangerous women slept, and where nothing would ever be the same again. The howl of the wind settled into a low, constant moan, a lullaby of ice and isolation. Inside the hut, the world had shrunk to the circle of firelight, the air thick with the scent of stew and the damp wool of drying clothes. Rian slept on, her breathing deep and even. Anya sat with her back against the wall, sharpening her knife with a slow, rhythmic scrape of stone on steel, her gaze distant. Kaylin had not moved from her seat by the hearth, but her posture had softened. She watched the flames dance, the light playing over the sharp planes of her face, catching in the deep, quiet pools of her eyes. Elias busied himself with cleaning the bowls, but his attention was pulled relentlessly towards her. The mark on the door was a silent shout in the room, a secret he now shared with her, though she did not know it. "You are far from any trade route," Anya stated, breaking the long silence. It wasn't a question. "You choose this solitude." "I do," Elias replied, wiping a wooden bowl dry. "The world below is loud. It complicates things that should be simple. Simple things are often the hardest to hold on to," Anya countered, her eyes flicking to Kaylin for a moment. "We were simple once. A sisterhood. Hunters. Now we are prey as well." This was more than she had offered before. Elias leaned against the counter, letting the silence prompt her further. "A lord," she continued, the words bitter on her tongue. "Lord Valerius. He desires our lands for his timber, our streams for his mills. We refused to be displaced, so he declared us outlaws, poachers on our own ancestral grounds. His men hunt us with dogs and cold iron." "And the woman you lost?" Elias asked softly. Anya's jaw tightened. "Lynn. She was a fierce heart. She bought our escape with her own." She looked directly at Elias, her amber gaze piercing. "We do not bring our trouble to your door lightly, woodcarver. We are in your debt." The confession hung in the air, explaining their tension, their weariness. It was Ryan who stirred then, sitting up and rubbing her eyes. The sleep seemed to have restored some of her spirit, and the fear in her eyes was replaced by a youthful, reckless curiosity. She accepted a cup of water from Elias, her fingers brushing his. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer than before, "for not leaving us to the snow." She held his gaze a moment too long, a faint flush on her cheeks. As the night deepened, Anya finally succumbed to exhaustion, her head nodding onto her chest. Rian, emboldened by the relative warmth and safety, found a skin of spiced wine in her pack and took a few long swallows. The effect was immediate. Her movements became looser, her voice louder. "This is a fine hut," she said, her eyes roaming over Elias with a new, unnerving appreciation. "Strong, well-made, a man who can build such a place. He must be strong, too." She took a step towards him, a coy smile playing on her lips. "It must be lonely out here all by yourself." Elias took a subtle step back. "I have my work." "Work is a poor companion on a long winter's night," Rian purred, her gaze flicking towards Kaylin, who was watching the exchange with an unreadable stillness. "A challenge." "Rian," Anya murmured, half asleep, a warning in her tone. But the young huntress was undeterred, the wine and the close quarters fueling a boldness that set Elias's teeth on edge. He needed air to escape the sudden cloying tension. He moved towards the wood box by the pantry. "The fire needs feeding." As he bent to gather an armful of logs, a shadow fell over him. He turned, and Kaelin was there, so close he could feel the heat from her body. She had moved with that preternatural silence of hers. The small pantry felt suddenly intensely confined. "She is young." Kaelin's voice was a low murmur, meant only for him. "Her heart is easily stirred by a warm fire and a kind deed." Elias's own heart was hammering against his ribs. "It's the wine talking, is it?" Her twilight eyes searched his face in the near darkness. The only light was a sliver from the main room, carving her profile in silver and shadow. She was so close he could see the faint scar that bisected her left eyebrow, could count the dark lashes framing her intense gaze. The sounds from the main room faded away. There was only the two of them in the intimate dark, the scent of pine and her, wild sage and cold night air. Then she leaned in, her lips almost brushing his ear. Her breath was warm, her words a secret etched into his soul. "I saw him first. Mine." The words were not a request. They were not a plea. They were a statement of fact, as solid and unshakable as the mountains outside. A primal claim that bypassed all reason and settled deep in his bones. Before he could form a thought, let alone a response, she was gone. She melted back into the firelight, leaving him alone in the pantry, his arms full of forgotten wood, his world tilted on its axis. The whisper echoed in the silence she left behind, a spell that had rewired the very air he breathed. He stood there for a long time, the cold from the logs seeping into his skin, trying to understand the storm that had just begun inside his own heart. The storm's fury had spent itself in the night, leaving behind a world hushed and gleaming under a hard porcelain sky. Sunlight streamed through the single window of the hut, illuminating dust motes dancing in the still air. The peace, however, was a fragile veneer. Anya was already moving, her movements efficient and grim as she checked their gear. "The snow is deep, but the wind has packed it. We can make good time." Her voice was all business, a leader focused on survival. She glanced at Elias, a flicker of gratitude in her amber eyes. "You saved our lives. We will not forget it." Rian was quieter now, the effects of the wine replaced by a morning-after tension. She kept her gaze averted from Elias, focusing on tightening the straps of her pack with a nervous energy. But her eyes kept drifting to Kaelin, who stood by the door, running a cloth along the blade of one of her short swords with a calm, methodical precision that felt like a provocation. The moment Anya had dreaded and Elias had unconsciously awaited had arrived. "We leave now," Anya announced, pulling on her gloves. "The longer we stay, the greater the danger, for us and for you." Rian shouldered her pack and took a step toward the door, but Anya's sharp voice stopped her. "Wait!" All eyes turned to the leader. Her face was a mask of solemn resolve. "A claim was made in this house last night," she said, her gaze sweeping from Rian to Kaelin and finally resting on Elias. "By our law, it cannot be ignored. It must be answered." Rian's face flushed a deep, mortified red. It was a whisper in the dark. "It means nothing." "It means everything," Anya countered, her voice brooking no argument. "Our ways are ancient for a reason, Rian. They keep the peace within the pack." Kaelin spoke the words. "The claim is valid." She turned to Elias, who felt the weight of the moment settle squarely on his shoulders. "The choice, however, is yours, Woodcarver. Our customs demand you make it. Do you accept Kaelin's claim?" Rian's breath hitched. "Anya, this is—" "Silence." Anya's voice cracked like a whip. "You knew the consequence of your flirtation. You challenged the claim with your actions. Now you will abide by the outcome." The hut was utterly silent. Elias could feel the intensity of their stares. Anya's expectant, Rian's desperate, and Kaelin's. Kaelin's was a deep, still pool, but beneath the surface he saw a flicker of something vulnerable. She had laid her soul bare with that whisper, and now her fate hinged on his next words. He looked at Rian, so young and full of fiery, impulsive life. To choose her would be to choose a tempest, a life of constant drama and uncertain footing. It would be a rejection of the profound, silent connection he had felt with Kaylin from the first moment their eyes met. He turned his gaze to Kaylin. She held it, unflinching. In her eyes, he saw not a demand, but an offer. Not a cage, but a sanctuary. A partnership of equals, of two solitary souls who understood the weight of silence. Elias began, his voice rough. I need a moment to clear my head. Before you go. Anya studied him for a long moment, then gave a single curt nod. You have until we cross the tree line. No longer. It was not a request. It was a deadline. The tension did not break. It simply changed form, becoming a ticking clock in the quiet room. Rian looked torn between hope and despair. Kaylin simply sheathed her sword, the soft click of the metal a period to the sentence Anya had spoken. They began to file out into the brilliant, cold morning. Anya first, then a reluctant shuffling Rian. Kaylin was the last to reach the door. She paused on the threshold, the sunlight setting a halo around her dark hair. She didn't look back, but her posture was a question mark etched against the white landscape. Then she was gone, stepping out into the snow. Elias was left alone in the sudden, crushing silence of the hut. The ghost of their presence lingered, a stray strand of red hair on a blanket, the impression of a boot by the fire. And the mark on his door, a permanent scar on his world. He had a choice to make, a path to choose. And for the first time in years, the solitary path ahead looked emptier than it ever had before. The silence in the wake of their departure was a physical presence, heavy and accusatory. Elias stood frozen in the center of his hut, the echo of the closing door still ringing in his ears. The choice Anya had forced upon him was a boulder in his chest, crushing the air from his lungs. Follow or stay. But as his eyes swept over his home, the carvings on the shelves, the fire he had built with his own hands, the deep, familiar grooves in the wooden floor, he knew he could not leave. This place was not just a shelter. It was the physical manifestation of his soul. To abandon it would be to abandon himself. Yet the thought of Kaylin walking away, of her quiet strength disappearing into the pines, felt like an amputation. His gaze fell upon his workbench, on the blocks of wood waiting for a purpose. And then he knew. He would not follow. He would not choose between them like picking a trinket at a market. If there was to be an answer, it would be his own. It would be an invitation. He moved to the bench, his hands, usually so steady, trembling slightly. He selected a small block of rich dark walnut, its grain tight and promising. He picked up his finest gouge, the handle worn smooth from years of use. He did not plan. He let his heart guide his hands. The form emerged quickly from the wood, as if it had always been waiting inside. A wolf, its head held high, ears pricked forward, not in aggression but in alertness, in loyalty. It was her spirit he was carving, the essence of Kaylin. Then, with a delicate blade, he began the true work. He carved a wreath around the wolf's neck, an intricate braid of oak leaves and thorny vines, a perfect mirrored replica of the symbol she had cut into his door, his claim to answer hers. He lost all track of time, his world narrowing to the connection between his soul, the blade, and the wood. Each stroke was a word, each shaving a sentence in a language only the two of them would understand. He was offering her his craft, his home, his heart, all bound together in this single carved piece. A soft sound from the doorway made him look up. Kaylin stood there. She had not gone far. She was framed in the doorway, her figure dark against the bright snow, her eyes fixed on him. She must have waited just beyond the tree line, hoping, watching. They are gone, she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. Anya will lead Rian to safety. My path diverged. Elias set the carving and his tool down. His heart was a wild thing in his chest. Why did you mark my door? She stepped fully inside, closing the door against the cold. She did not approach, but her presence filled the room. It is an old symbol of my people, she explained, her gaze steady on his. The wolf for the protector, the hunter. The vines for the bond that cannot be broken. It is a ward, to keep harm away, and, she hesitated, a rare show of uncertainty. It is a claim, a declaration that this place, and the person within it, is under my protection. That they are cherished. The word hung in the air. So much softer and deeper than mine. You barely know me, Elias said. The words, a breath. I know that you are kind enough to open your door to strangers in a storm, she said, taking a slow step forward. I know your hands create beauty from rough wood. I know your silence is not empty but full of thought. I know you value your peace, yet you risked it for us. She stopped a few feet from him. I have known men who shouted their virtues from the rooftops. I have never known one who whispered them with every action as you do. Her honesty disarmed him completely. I have been alone for a long time, he admitted. As have I, she replied. Since the fever took my family. The pack is my family now, but the loneliness remains. Until I stepped in here. Until I saw you. Her eyes glistened in the morning light. The mark was not a demand, Elias. It was a hope. A prayer cast into the storm. He looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw the strength, yes, but also the sorrow, the resilience, the profound loneliness that mirrored his own. He saw a partner. He saw a home. He picked up the finished carving and held it out to her. A claim was made, he said, echoing Anya's words. And a choice must be given. She took it, her fingers brushing his. As her eyes fell upon the carved wolf with its wreath of thorns and oak, her breath caught. Her composure, so fiercely maintained, finally fractured. A single tear traced a clean path through the dust on her cheek. She understood. It was his answer. It was his heart, offered freely. She looked from the carving to his face, and a true radiant smile broke through, transforming her features from beautiful to utterly breathtaking. My hunt is over, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. My pack is here. The morning dawned crisp and painfully bright. The world outside transformed into a pristine, silent cathedral of white. The storm had scoured the land, leaving behind a clarity that felt both beautiful and brutal. Inside the hut, the air was thick with unspoken words and the scent of pine needles and damp wool. Anya was already packing with a quiet efficiency, her movements sharp and purposeful. Rian avoided everyone's eyes, her earlier bravado replaced by a sullen, wounded pride. She focused on checking her gear, her fingers fumbling with the buckles on her pack. Only Kaylin was still, seated on the stool by the cold hearth, her gaze fixed on the intricate carvings of a wolf pack that Elias had etched into the mantelpiece. She looked as if she had not moved all night, a statue waiting for a verdict. The trail will be difficult, but passable, Anya announced, breaking the heavy silence. She pulled her fur-lined cloak over her shoulders. We've overstayed our welcome and endangered your peace. For that, you have our thanks and our apology. Elias simply nodded, his own heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The moment he had both dreaded and secretly anticipated was here. Anya turned to Kaylin. It is time. Kaylin rose, her movements fluid and silent. She did not look at Elias as she pulled on her own cloak and fastened her twin swords to her back. The finality of the action sent a spike of panic through him. This was it. They were simply going to walk away, and the mark on his door would become nothing but a forgotten scar. Ryan shouldered her pack and made for the door, but Anya put a hand on her arm, stopping her. The leader's amber eyes settled on Elias, firm yet not unkind. Our ways are not your ways, woodcarver, Anya said, but a claim was made. It is not a chain, it is an offer, and by our customs, the one who is claimed must choose to accept it, or it dissolves with the first sunrise. She gestured to Kaylin, who finally met his gaze. Her twilight eyes were a storm of guarded hope and resignation. The choice is yours. Will you follow? Rian tensed, a flicker of desperate hope in her own eyes. Elias looked from Anya's expectant face to Rian's youthful yearning and finally to Kaylin. He saw the slight tremor in her hands, the almost imperceptible tightening of her jaw. She was prepared for him to say no. She had been prepared for it all along. He did not look at the door they would walk out of. Instead, he walked to his workbench where a small, carefully wrapped bundle lay. He picked it up, the weight of it familiar and right in his palm. He did not go to Rian. He did not follow Anya. He walked directly to Kaylin and stopped before her. The air between them crackled. He saw the question in her eyes, the fragile wall of her composure. You asked if I would follow, Elias said, his voice low but clear in the quiet hut. "My place is here. My life is here." He saw the light in her eyes begin to dim, a quiet dying of hope. He pressed on. "But it is a lonely life." He held out the bundle to her. A claim was made, and a choice must be given. Slowly, never breaking her gaze, she took the bundle and unwrapped it. Nestled in the rough cloth was a wood carving. It was a wolf, not in a snarl, but in a posture of calm vigilance, its head held high, and around its neck, carved with impossible delicacy, was a wreath of oak leaves and thorny vines, an exact mirror of the symbol she had cut into his door. It was a masterpiece of understanding, his soul rendered in polished walnut. Her breath caught, her fingers traced the lines of the carving, a touch as reverent as a prayer. "You marked my door," Elias whispered, "for her ears alone. But you carved your name on my soul the moment you walked in. The offer is not to follow you. The offer is to stay, with me." The stillness that followed was different from before. It was not empty, but full. The tension drained from Kaylin's shoulders, and for the first time, a true, unguarded emotion softened her features. A profound, awe-struck relief. A single tear traced a path through the dust on her cheek, and she did not brush it away. She looked from the carving in her hands to his face, and she gave a single, slow nod. "My hunt is over," she whispered. "My pack is here." Anya let out a soft sigh, a sound of release and acceptance. She placed a hand on Kaylin's shoulder, a silent transfer of leadership and blessing. "The clan will know. Your bond is recognized." She then turned to Rian, whose face had fallen but now held a dawning sense of acceptance. "The matter is settled. We go." Rian nodded, her youthful infatuation finally yielding to the weight of a truer, deeper bond. She offered Elias a small, respectful smile before turning to leave. Without another word, Anya and Rian opened the door, letting in a blast of clean, cold air and a rectangle of blinding white light. They stepped through it and were gone, their figures soon swallowed by the glittering expanse of the snow-covered pines. The door closed and the cabin was silent once more. But the silence was different. It was no longer empty. It was a shared silence, a comfortable breathing thing. Elias turned to Kaylin. She was still looking at the carving, a small, genuine smile playing on her lips. She then looked up at him, her twilight eyes clear and sure. "The storm has passed," she said. "Yes," he agreed, moving to stand beside her. He didn't take her hand, but he stood close enough to feel the warmth of her. They looked out the window together, at the untrampled snow and the sun-drenched trees. "A new one will come eventually." "They always do," she replied, her voice steady. "But we will face it. Together." He looked at her then. This fierce, quiet woman who had stepped out of a blizzard and carved a place for herself in the heart of his world. She was not a disruption to his peace. She was its new vital component. "Welcome home, Kaylin," he said. The word hung in the air, simple and profound. Home. She leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture of trust more intimate than any kiss. Outside, the world was vast and wild and uncertain. But inside the small hut, surrounded by the silent witnesses of his carvings, two solitary souls had found their anchor. The hunt was over. A new story was just beginning.